Aussie Migration and Visa Professional Solutions.
Hello, everyone. Good day. My name is Edmund, and I am the registered migration agent of Aussie Migration and Visa Professional Solutions. Today's information session will be talking about parents of Australian citizens and permanent residents. Now, we know that just last month, there's a policy of the Australian government allowing parents of Australian citizens to come to Australia on a visitor visa. Now, this discussion will be talking about the sponsored parent temporary visa, subclass 870. This is not a visitor visa because this is a separate type of a family visa. A visitor visa for parents that can be under the family-sponsored stream. Now, what I like about this visa is that you don't need to satisfy the balance of family test, which means at least majority of the children of that parent should be Australian citizens or permanent residents. Now, that's one of the reasons why those parents cannot be sponsored for the family visas. Now, I'll share my screen. There you go. Now, sponsored parent temporary visa, and this is subclass 870. Now, this visa provides parents with new pathway to temporarily reunite with their children and grandchildren in Australia. The visa responds to community concerns about the limited number of parent places in the migration program and associated lengthy waiting periods. To be eligible for this visa, a parent must be the biological, adoptive, or step-parent of the sponsor, who must be an Australian citizen, Australian permanent resident, or eligible New Zealand citizen. Now, take note of the word biological, adoptive, or step-parent of the sponsor. What does this mean? This means that only the biological child of the visa applicant can sponsor the parent. So the son-in-law cannot sponsor the parent of his wife or his husband because the requirement is that the parent must be the biological, adoptive, or step-parent of the sponsored child. Now let's continue. This new visa will allow Australians to sponsor their parents to stay in Australia for up to 5 years at a time. So depending on the sponsor and the applicant, they can choose whether to apply for the 3-year visa or the 5-year visa. But take note that for the whole duration of the visa or this visa application, it can be up to a maximum of 10 years only. So if the first granted 870 visa is about to expire, then they can apply for another one, provided that the total number of years is only up to 10 years. Now, this new visa arrangement does not replace the existing parent visa or the parent category visas. Now, as I mentioned, what I like about this 870 visa is that you don't need to comply with the balance of family test requirement. Now, there are so many Filipinos here who want to sponsor their parents who are in the Philippines. They want to apply for family visas like parent visa, contributory parent visa. However, they fail to meet the balance of family test requirement. Why? Because the balance of family test, for you to be able to meet that criteria, majority of the children must be residents or the majority of the children must be permanent residents or Australian citizens. Now, with the 870 visa, you don't need to comply with that requirement. Now, this new arrangement is for parents, as I mentioned, biological or adoptive, instead parents of Australian citizens, Australian permanent residents, and eligible New Zealand citizens. Now, eligible New Zealand citizens, this is a technical term. When we say eligible, these are the New Zealand citizens who arrive in Australia on a particular date, and this is by virtue of the agreement between Australia and New Zealand. Now, introduction. As I mentioned, the balance of family test does not apply to this new visa. So you don't need to worry if you are the only one, or you're the only child who is an Australian citizen, which is common because you can sponsor your parents to come to Australia and live for up to maximum of 10 years. In comparison with the visitor visa under the family-sponsored stream, you can also apply for that stream to bring your parents, but that's only for a more limited duration, to be for up to 1 year, and then they need to come back to the Philippines and then come in again. So with the 870 visa, you don't need to do that because the duration could be up to 3 years or 5 years, depending upon the purpose why the parent should be in Australia. Now, to be granted a temporary sponsored parent visa, a person must satisfy a number of requirements. So these are the requirements for the applicant. The applicant is the parent. Number one, having their child, Australian child, approved as a sponsor. Second, meet identity, health, and character requirements. Third, not having an outstanding public health debt in Australia. Now, take note that in this visa, 870 parent visa, the first requirement is that your child must be an approved sponsor. So you cannot directly apply for this visa. The first step is that the sponsor or your child or the child of the parent who is an Australian citizen or permanent resident must lodge the application to be considered as an approved sponsor. Take note that the parents also are required to hold and maintain health insurance from an Australian provider. So this is a overseas visitor cover insurance, and the duration of the insurance will be for the intended period of stay in Australia. Now, for the visa application charge, a 5-year visa will be 10,000 Australian dollars. A 3-year visa is 5,000. Now, if you compare this visa application charge with the other parent visas, then this is affordable. Other parent visas, aside from meeting the balance of family test, you need to pay a huge amount of money. Now, applications to sponsor a parent for a sponsored parent are open just last 17th of April 2019. Once the sponsorship application has been approved, a sponsored parent will be able to apply for a sponsored parent temporary visa subclass 870. So it tells us that this is a new visa, and the sponsorship application was open 17th of April 2019. And the applications for this visa, or the parents can apply for this visa from the 1st of July 2019. Now let's talk about the lodgement of the 870 visa. Now, like any other visas, this is lodged online. But you can either apply outside or inside Australia. If applying outside Australia, a visa application must be lodged within 6 months of the sponsorship approval. So If applying in Australia, the visa application must have permission to apply in Australia. So take note of the difference. If the applicant is outside Australia, the visa application must be lodged within 6 months of the sponsorship approval. However, if the applicant is in Australia and that parent used another type of visa to come in Australia, then they can apply for this visa upon seeking permission to apply in Australia. So there is no time limitation here. If the visa applicant has permission to apply in Australia, they must apply within 60 days of the sponsorship approval. So take note of the 60 days requirement. If the visa applicant does not apply within 60 days, they have to lodge their visa application outside Australia within 6 months of the sponsorship approval, or make an application for a different visa to remain in Australia. So this means that you are obliged to apply within 60 days of the sponsorship approval. Otherwise, you cannot apply anymore inside Australia. And you can only apply if you go out of Australia and within 6 months of the sponsorship approval, you make the application. Now, the genuine temporary entrant criteria to apply. What are the purposes of this visa? Now, take note that the applicants here are parents of Australian citizens and permanent residents. Now, the purpose of the visa are the following. First, to stay only temporarily in Australia. Second, abide by the visa conditions. And third, if the client or the sponsor has already lodged a permanent parent visa application while being decided, they can remain in Australia while the application is being decided. Now, what are the requirements of the sponsor? And we know that the sponsor must be a biological child. So meaning the in-law cannot sponsor the parent of his spouse. Now, the obligations are provide a valid evidence of identity, be an Australian citizen, permanent resident, or eligible New Zealand citizen, must be 18 years old, have lived in Australia for at least 4 years. Now, take note of this residence requirement. The sponsor child must have lived in Australia for at least 4 years. And there is an income requirement. There's an income requirement, which we will discuss later. And the sponsor must also accept legal liability for any outstanding public health debt their sponsored parent accrues. Must be approved before 870 visa application be lodged, and take note that the sponsorship fee is $420. This is on top of the visa application charge. Now, important here, the residence requirement that the sponsor must be living in Australia for 4 years minimum, income requirements, and that the sponsor is the biological child of the applicant. Now, as to the income, take note of the amount. 83,404.80. Only sponsors with taxable income of 83,404.80 will be able to sponsor their parents. If a sponsor's taxable income is combined with other taxable incomes, such as the spouse or another child of the parent, and that combined amount is at least equal to 83,444.80 centavos, then the taxable income test is met. So this means that if the sponsor child cannot meet the 83,454 income, taxable income, then he can add up the taxable income of his spouse or another child of the parent. So if that sponsor has a brother, then they can combine their taxable income. So the 83,454 be met. Now, can the sponsorship be changed? The answer is yes. Now take note that sponsorship can only cover up to 2 parents per household at a time. So you can't have 3 parents under the 870 visa. So the scenario here is that you can either sponsor your mother and father, or you can sponsor either of your parents, and your husband can also sponsor either of his parents. Approved parent sponsor are able to change their approved sponsorship arrangements if they wish to add, remove, or replace a sponsored parent. To vary sponsorship, the sponsor need to lodge a new sponsorship application for approval as a parent sponsor. So you need to apply for a new sponsorship application. Okay. Adding a parent, can that be done? Yes. The child can vary sponsorship to sponsor an additional new parent. So you can add a parent. If the child is already an approved sponsor for one parent, they can apply to add another parent to the sponsorship. Now, what are the obligations of the sponsor? First, if an event occurs in relation to a person who is an approved family sponsor, the person must give details to the event to the immigration within 28 days of the event occurring. So take note of the requirement. Within 28 days counted from the happening of the event. Now, what are these events? First, a change to any information provided in the immigration application. Second, if the person is charged with or convicted of an offense. Third, if a debt the person has incurred to the Commonwealth becomes overdue. Fourth, the person becomes the subject of an apprehended violence order or a similar order issued under a law of state or territory of a foreign country, and a person sponsored by the person dies. So these are the events that needs to be reported to the immigration within 28 days from the happening of the event. Now, what are the visa conditions attached to 870? First, your parent can come to Australia, but they cannot engage in a paid work. Why is it called paid work? Because we know that Australian citizens and permanent residents usually let their parents come to Australia so that they can take care of their grandchildren. And that is not considered as a paid work. That's why they can do such kinds of activities. But take note, condition 8103 provides that the visa applicant cannot engage in a compensated or paid work. The visa holder cannot receive any salary unless they have received permission in writing from the department. So that's the exception. Second condition, 8303, character requirement. The holder or the parent must not have become involved in disruptive or violent activities that endanger or threaten any individual. So they must be of good moral character while they are in Australia while holding this visa. Otherwise, they will violate the 8303 character condition. The holder must not become involved in any activities disruptive to or violence, threatening harm to the Australian community or a group within the Australian community. So this means that in case the parent becomes violent in Australia or engages in any violent activities, their visa may be cancelled and they can be removed in Australia. Next one, the 8501 health insurance requirement. So the visa holder must maintain adequate arrangements for health insurance during their stay in Australia. 8531 must leave before visa expiry. The holder must not remain in Australia after the end of the period. Visa condition 8550, the visa holder must notify the department in person or contact details minimum of 2 days prior to change occurring. And condition 8564, the visa holder must not engage in criminal conduct. Now, what about the public interest criteria? Number one, character test. Second, they must not be a risk to the Australian security. 4003, presence contrary to Australia's foreign policy. 4005, they must meet health criteria. The applicant does not become undue cost to the community if staying for more than 12 months. The applicant has signed the value statement. 4020, false misleading information, and 4021 must have a valid passport. So these are the criteria that the applicant must meet so that they can come to Australia. I think that's all, and I hope to talk to you next time.